So, Namaste, Adab, and good afternoon. Welcome to the fifth evening of the eighth edition of Metaphor, the Lucknow Literature Festival. This otherwise would have been a 3-day festival involving live interactions with our celebrated speakers about books, music, cinema, food, photography. But due to COVID pandemic, it has been stretched over a week as online interactive sessions. We are a homegrown festival which began with small book reading gatherings and bethaks. Joining us today is Mr. Pavan Varma to talk about his latest book, The Greatest Ode to Lord. Formerly in the Indian Foreign Services, Mr. Varma is an exceptional writer, actually a best-selling writer. He has served as Rajya Sabha member and also as the National General Secretary and National Spokesperson for Janata Dal United. Some of his books are Adi Shankaracharya, Hinduism's Greatest Thinker, Krishna the Playful Divine, Yudhishthir and Draupadi, Being Indian, the truth about why the 21st century will be India's, and my favorite book, The Great Indian Middle Class. In conversation with Mr. Varma is Ms. Pragya Tewari. She's a journalist and an editor focused on writing about policy, politics, and culture. She has edited publications such as The Big Indian Picture, Tehelka, and Vice India, and she continues to write for publications such as New York Times, Al Jazeera, The Hindu, and Quint. Currently, she runs the Indian History Collective and heads a digital strategy agency, which is interestingly called OIJO, which comes from OIJ, colloquially speaking, out there. And Pragya is definitely out there in the middle of storms. She creates or kills. In his latest book, Mr. Varma says the name of the book is, let me say that again, The Greatest Ode to Lord Ram, Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas. He has selected some of the most evocative stanzas from the epic, offering a succinct commentary for each that capture the very core of the original written by Tulsidas. Writing in the 16th century, Tulsidas chose to pen verses in Awadhi rather than Sanskrit, thus breaking with the literary tradition and importantly, making Lord Ram more relatable to the layperson. Mr. Varma's compelling new selection and commentary achieves this effect by combining the aesthetics, romance, and the imagery of the original work with an unadulterated spirituality that sparkles through the conduct of a great God. So, Pragya, you take on from here, and we hope to look forward to a very interesting interaction between you and Mr. Pavan Varma.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure and always a privilege to be speaking with Mr. Varma because it's embarrassing to say such flattering things to him to his face. But what must be done, what must be done. I genuinely believe that he is one of the most important, one of the most relevant, one of the most erudite and one of the most prolific public intellectuals of our times. And I always look forward to reading his books as well as to listening to him. But this occasion is extra special because his latest book, which is The Greatest Ode to Lord Ram, is it's a lovely book. It's which is as expected from Mr. Varma, but it's also particularly special to me because I come from the part of the world where the original Tulsidas's Ramayana originated, and it is also believed that Lord Ram was from that part. And what is significant is that the book is written in Awadhi, which is the dialect that my family speaks in. And therefore, in my childhood, I grew up listening to Chaupais in Awadhi from Ramcharitmanas, as well as the idea of Ram that I grew up with is very much the idea of Ram that is enshrined in this particular book. But जैसे कहते हैं सोने पे सुहागा, what makes this even more special is that the platform that we're interacting on this afternoon is a literature festival based in Lucknow. which we consider to, of course, be an integral part of Awadh. So I thank the Lucknow Literature Festival for a metaphor for having us. And as soon as Pavanji is done with his phone call, which he is now, I would like to congratulate you on writing yet another extremely essential book and extremely well written book. And क्योंकि बात अवध से शुरू हुई है, I will begin by asking you that we take it for granted now that Ramcharitmanas to अवधि में लिखी गई है. But we keep forgetting very often that this is not an intuitive or natural choice that the author, Tulsidas ji, is making. It is, in fact, quite a radical choice that involved some amount of legend writing of sort of a stamp of approval from Lord Shiv and whatnot to kind of give it legitimacy. So, can you tell us about the choice of writing a book in Avdi, where that may have come from, and the context in which this choice is made?
Thank you, Pragya. May I reiterate what a pleasure it is to talk to you and to participate in the Lucknow Literature Festival, for which I want to thank Kanakji and all her colleagues. To answer your question, you see, the choice of Awadhi by Tulsidas is both radical and, in a sense, predictable. Radical because Tulsidas was a scholar in Sanskrit. Sanskrit was considered for very long to be the language of important works, especially in the genre of epics. The original Valmiki's Ramayana, written some 2000 years earlier, was written in Sanskrit. And so when Tulsidas in the 16th century decided to write in Awadhi, it was a break. In fact, he was particularly vulnerable to what his peer group would say, for someone who has left Sanskrit to write in Awadhi, and that is why the legend where, as you rightly put it, legitimization is sought. It is said that the Ramcharitmanas was put among other books on Sri Ram in the Vishwanath temple in Varanasi, and the room locked, and it was put at the bottom of the heap, but miraculously in the morning when the doors were opened, it was at the top of the heap with the blessings from Lord Shiva himself, saying Satyam Shivam Sundaram. And the reason for it is that Tulsidas and such legends needed to validate that choice. But why is it not Why is it not radical? Because with the onset of the Bhakti movement, what is the Bhakti movement? The Bhakti movement was an attempt at a pan-Indian scale by Hinduism to reinvent itself. It needed to reinvent itself partly because, to some extent, it was overgrown by the ritualism and paraphernalia of Brahmanical control of religion. Secondly, it needed to protect itself from the Turkic invasion and their proselytizing zeal and hostility towards other faiths, something which Hinduism of this organized scale had not faced in the past. So what Hinduism, and I talk of it as a collective, did was to move away from the more cloistered sanctum sanctorums of defined temples controlled by the priestly class and take the lore and legend and audacity of thought of Hinduism to the masses. And that led to much of what was written, not only for Sri Ram, but for Sri Krishna and Radha, from Sanskrit to the other languages of India. And there were a host of authors who preceded Tulsidas. There was Chandidas, there was Vidyapati, there was Surdas, there was Bihari, there was later Govindas, and Tulsidas in perhaps was the most important writer whose focus was not Krishna but Ram. And he did for Sri Ram what so many other writers had done for Sri Krishna by taking Sri Ram to the masses in a language which sat easily on their lips, could be memorized, could be chanted both as kirtans and as exceptionally important spiritual insights into the whole notion of Maryada Purushottam Ram. That is why I think it was radical for Tulsidas, and yet it was a predictable part of a mainstream movement where under the Bhakti movement, and I will talk a little later about the Bhakti aspect of philosophy, because it's central to Tulsidas' Ramcharitmanas. That is why Tulsidas, I think, chose the language Awadhi.
Moving on to जो आप भक्ति के बारे में कह रहे थे, moving on to that, we often think of Ramayana because there is so much when we recite जो हमें याद रहती हैं चौपाइयाँ वगैरह. Mostly we think of the attributes of Sri Ram, the conversations he's having, etc., etc. So, which is quintessential sort of sagun. But it is in many ways also a nirgun text. And I think over and above that, it can be argued that one of the many things that Tulsidas Ji achieves with this text is to sort of reconcile an age-old tussle between the nirgun and sagun conceptualizations of God and using bhakti, in fact, as a bridge between them. Could you tell us a little bit more about what this tussle has been and the sort of role that bhakti plays in reconciling different aspects of Hindu philosophy?
Thank you, Pragya. That's an important question and essential to understand the Manas. You see, there are two important strands in the evolution of Hinduism. One is Nirguna, Brahma, where the ultimate is defined in terms which have no attributes. Neti, neti, not this, not this. That Brahma is pulsating cosmic consciousness, pervading the cosmos, in animate and inanimate things, in you and me, and so on and so forth. It is akhand, indivisible, achintya, beyond sight, adrishtya, achintya, beyond thought, adrisht, beyond sight, nirvishesh, chinmatram, undifferentiated, pure consciousness, supremely intelligent, sarv pratyay darshanin, and so on and so forth. And purna, it's complete in itself, fulfillment itself, and its inferential experience for anyone who experiences that Brahm is unalloyed bliss and joy. Satchidanand, Chid Anand. That is the notion of the powerful Advait school. The Advait school itself was part of 6 systems of Hindu philosophy: the Sankhya, the Yoga, the Nyaya, Vaisheshik, the Purv Mimansh, the Uttar Mimansh. Uttar Mimansh is Vedant or Advait. Now, as you know, Adi Shankaracharya in the 8th century was, after the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutras, the most powerful exponent of the Nirguna school of Advait. But his concept of the ultimate as an attributeless absolute was modified over a period of time by a series of philosophers, not arbitrarily, but through a philosophical debate, of which the more important ones were Ramanuj, Nimbarkar, and others, who said, yes, the ultimate reality is Nirguna, but for purposes of the devotee, that Nirgun Brahm is capable of manifestation, Vishisht Advait, Shuddh Advait, Dvait Advait. In other words, Advait is non-dual, qualified dualism, uh, modified dualism, and so on and so forth, which led to the Shagun school, which is Nirgun, attributeless, Sagun, attributeful. And to the foreigner, there seems to be a contradiction between the two, not to the Hindu mind. Hindus are harmonious schizophrenics. You know, they can combine. So I believe that ultimately the ultimate pervades me and you and is in everything. You can worship a rock, a piece of stone, a tree, or anything else. They are all manifestations of that absolute. But whatever was I was disturbed. But the Hindu also believes, revels, now having anchored himself strongly in the Nirgun concept, which is the most powerful school of Hindu philosophy. The devotee is capable of an imagination going amok in the manifestation of the Sagun deity. You understand? Where he gives him many forms. Shri Ram, you will see, Kandar pe aganit amit chabi nav neel neerad sundaram, patapita mana hutarit ruchi shuchi naumi janaka sutavaram. So, description, Devis, forearms, different things in different hands. Now, to the foreigner, a foreign observer, even the Indologist, it seems a riot as against the one God of the Abrahamic faith. Here you have a riot of gods. What they don't understand is that the Hindu mind is reconciled, that at one level there is the absolute, undefinable Nirgun. At another level, we accept the Sagun as a derogation of that Nirgun, to which we imbue with the greatest level our own imagination and create a devotee which we can love. So there is no. Now, when you come to the Bhakti school, what happens is that all the Bhakti poets said, fine, there is the Nirgun school and the Sagun school. But go beyond this philosophical quibble. Ultimately, salvation lies in total surrender to that ultimate, which is both Nirgun and Sagun. So, for instance, Tulsidas writes, Aguna Sagun doi Brahma Sarupa. Akatha Agatha Anadi Anupa. Agun and Sagun, Nirgun and Sugun are two manifestations of that same Brahman, Brahm. Aguna Saguna doi Brahma Swarupa, Akatha Agatha Anadi Anupa. So now he's reconciling the two. Or he'll say Aguna Arup Alak Ajjoi, Bhagati Prema Bas Saguna Hojoi. Agun, Arup, formless, Alak, Ajoy, unborn. That which is all of this, because of the devotion of the devotee, Bhagati Prema Bas becomes a manifested form, Saguna Hojoi. And then the Bhakti movement reconciles the two. It says, Phulai Kamal So Hasar Kaisa, Nirgun Brahma Sagun Bane Jaisa. In the waters of the pool emerges a lotus so beautiful. Just like Nirgun Brahm becomes Sagun Ishwar. So there is a reconciliation. And the essential message is that the philosophies are important, but they are interred in us by now. We don't need to interpret them. Ultimately, salvation lies in total surrender, which negates your ego, stills your mind, and prepares yourself one step further to that very bliss and joy which are the inferential experience of Brahman or Brahman. So therefore, the Bhakti movement is exceptionally important because it speaks of a direct communion of the devotee with the ultimate, a personalized relationship. And Sri Ram, for the devotee, becomes a personal god. You know, if you go to Jagannath Puri, there are occasions when I have seen devotees abusing Sri Krishna, saying that so and so, you said you'll do this for me, what happened? It is a sign of the intimacy between devotee and the ultimate. That all barriers of conventional behavior are also broken. That is the bhakti movement, where the God can be a beloved, the God can be a lover, the God can be a friend, the God can be even temporarily an adversary, but he is mine or she is mine. So this is what the bhakti movement did in terms of reconciling the difference between Nirgun and Sadguna.
We don't even have to go as far as Puri. Even in Ayodhya, there is a temple जहाँ जिनको राम जी के ससुराल माना जाता है.
Can you give me 10
Of
seconds?
course.
1.5. Yes, please.
We don't have to go as far as Puri. Even in Ayodhya, there is a temple जहाँ जिसको राम जी की ससुराल माना जाता है और खाना खिलाने से पहले उन्हें गाली खिलाई जाती है because that is the pratha. But moving on, दोनों जो आपने the book that you've written, you've chosen certain verses, you've spoken about what you've translated them, you've spoken about what these verses kind of contextualize them, explain them, and there is a lot of philosophy, which is sort of the bedrock of the Nirgun school of conceptualization of God. But there is also, of course, the Sagun, the beautiful descriptions, the kind of nuanced characterization, etc., etc. And of course, the central character in this is that of Ram, जिनको हम मर्यादा पुरुषोत्तम बोलते हैं. So, could you tell us a little bit, if in using a literary sort of term, deconstruct the sort of character that Tulsidas ji envisages for Ram? What is it that he talks about when he talks about Maryada Purushottam? Who is Ram? What are his essential qualities?
You see, Maryada Purushottam essentially means the epitome of rectitude. That Sri Ram, in a dispassionate sense, will do the right thing as dictated by Maryada or Dharma. Dharma is very widely interpreted in Hinduism. That's a subject for a full-fledged debate.
But we will come to.
Yeah. But as dictated by what should be done, which is considered to be right and which he thinks is right. So, in all such cases, Sri Ram is a symbol of equipoise, of transcendence, an involvement but transcendent, because his touchstone is not subjective but objective. What is right, rather than what he thinks is right. And that governs his decisions, even when he is banished into exile. He does not show any anger. Anger, envy, vengeance, prejudice. But the pursuit of justice is not excluded, because that is part of Maryada Purushottam. But any subjective emotions in the process, he finesses by his unwavering commitment to have that one objective touchstone of conduct, which is what is right. So he meets Kaikeyi, and Kaikeyi says, "Suno hu Ram, sab karan ehu, Raja tum par bahut snehu." The real thing is that the king is far too partial to you, I can't take it. And Ramji says, "Sun janani, soi sut bad bhagi, jo pitu mat bachan anuragi." Listen, mother, that child is blessed who can follow the instructions of his parents with love, and goes away into exile. because that's a vow given by his father. He implements it. Now, maybe Sri Krishna would have railed against this injustice. And that is again gives you a sense of the scope of Hindu divinity at the Sagun level. For every Maryada Purushottam, you have to have a Leela Purushottam. For every Sita, you have to have a Radha. No aspect of human imagination remains unfulfilled in the expression of the Sagun Ishwar or Devi. And you create characters or deities who capture the imagination for centuries, who become Sanatan like Hinduism is. So, that to my mind is why uh, Sri Ram is called Maryada Purushottam, and that is the reason why Sri Krishna, the child who steals butter, the precocious adolescent who flirts with the gopis, and who has the ras with the gopis, who encourages a bit of minor cheating during the Mahabharata because the main goal is to win the war. The means justify the end. So that is Leela Purushottam Krishna. Sri Ram would not do that.
You preempted my next question, which was in fact going to be just this, because you've written about Krishna as well, and a wonderful book at that. And at least to my mind, I feel like understanding Ram, in order to understand Ram, one must also understand Krishna as a foil to Sri Ram. So if you'll indulge me, could you just tell us a little bit more about how Krishna plays this sort of foil? I mean, you, of course, delineated it wonderfully by saying Maryada Purushottam on the one hand and Leela Purushottam on the other hand. But if you could just make it a little bit more concrete for our listeners with some examples, that would be lovely.
No, because Krishna is many personalities rolled into one. Sri Ram is an extension of one's personality. Thumaka chalata Ramachandra. And in that gait and pace he goes through life. Perhaps in his predictable equipoise, sometimes he's boring. Krishna is never boring. And I'm saying for some people perhaps, Sri Krishna is effervescence. That's also a form of divinity. Both the calm ocean and the restless ocean, Maryada and Leela, are part of that same divinity, different moods of it. And so Sri Krishna has many personalities rolled into one. He's the adorable child. He could just have been one god like that. He is the irresistible lover. Cupid and Amor rolled into one. He could be just the warrior, as he was during the Mahabharata. He could have been just by himself the sage who elucidates Nishkam Karma, the path of doing your duty without thought of reward. One of the most powerful, in Hinduism, the three foundational texts are the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, and the Bhagavad Gita. It's a world in itself. And Bhakti movement starts from there, where he says in his Virat Roop, surrender to me, quite apart from its essential philosophical message of Nishkam Karma. Krishna makes a direct appeal. Don't think so much. Surrender to me. I am both the means and the guarantor of your salvation. So it could be, but apart from that, it's the Nishkam Karma. And after Krishna, then came the Alvars and the Nayanars in the south, who in the 7th and 8th century began the Bhakti movement, which came to fruition most powerfully first in Maharashtra, with Namdev, with Tukaram, with Gyandev. And it started, and then it was a pan-Indian movement, the Bhakti movement. So Krishna was child, lover, warrior, he was savior. He was the ultimate personal God. There was a time when we had the very condemnable and unfortunate system of widows not being given permission, falsely quoting religious scriptures to remarry. And so you had child widows. And they would be given a replica of Sri Krishna the child. And he became so much a part of their lives, that they would, in the routine sense, wake up, feed Sri Krishna, bathe him, change his clothes. If asked to do something, they said, no, this is the time I have to put him to sleep. He became the ultimate personal God. And so he was God, savior, warrior, child, lover, you can name it. So that is Krishna for you. Sri Ram follows a majestic but predictable trajectory.
So one of the things that sort of emerges beautifully is in through this book, through the kind of verses that you've chosen, particularly through some of the dialogues that you've chosen between characters. And by the way, to those of you listening, we earlier talked about Nirgun and Sagun, and there's actually a dialogue between Shiv and Parvati in the book that Pavanji writes about and translates wonderfully, about this sort of the very conversation that we were having between Shiv and Parvati about reconciling Nirgun and Sagun. But coming back to what I was saying for now, we see Ram in sort of all his human glory in through a lot of these dialogues, by which I mean we see him as somebody embroiled in victory, in ideas of victory and defeat in war. We see him as a brother, as a suffering husband, as a father. And suffering, of course, is a thread that runs through his life in many, many different forms. But on the other hand, he is also God. He is also above war, he's above victory, he's above human relations and ties and suffering, etc. And I feel like the reconciliation, or the point at which these two things meet, is also the heart of the Ramcharitmanas, and also essential to understanding Ram. Because, like you said, a lot of us think he is this boring God, he's very easy to understand, but he's kind of not also. So I just wanted you to talk about these two, the Ram the human and Ram the God, and where
See, Ram is human. Doesn't he fall in love with Sita in the bower?
And there's a beautiful description that you write about where he talks about her beauty.
No, I mean with Tulsidas. Sundar kahu sundar ta kahu sundar karai. She makes even the beautiful more beautiful. Through Ram's eyes. Sundar ta kahu sundar karai. Chabi grah deep shikha janu barvi. Like in a hall of beautiful paintings, somebody lights a lamp so that the entire home becomes aglow. That is the radiance. Sakina madhya siya so hati kaise, chabigana madhya maha chabi jaise. It's like the great portrait of sheer loveliness surrounded by her sakhis while going for the Jaimal. And Tulsidas accords to Ram a very human aspect as he confides to Lakshman and to Sita, a very human aspect of falling in love. It's one of the most beautiful descriptions of the Manas. And that when Sita is abducted, Ram is beside himself. Sri Ram is besides himself with grief. And it's begun to thunder and rain, and he tells Lakshman, Ghana Gamanda Nab Garajat Gora Priya Heen Dar Patamana Mora. This is God saying. The clouds are raging and it's raining, and without my beloved I feel afraid. Priya Heen Dar Patamana Mora. This is God saying. So it's quite human. I mean, to be human, or to derogate divinity to the level of human emotion, is a part of personalized devotion. And Tulsidas is aware of this. I mean, when he praises Sri Ram in terms of his physical beauty, Ram and Lakshman. Shyam Gaur Kim Karo Bakhani. The blue and Lakshman is Gaur color. Shyam Gaur Kim Karo Bakhani. Gira Anayan Nayan Abhinabani. Speech is without eyes, eyes without speech. How do you describe it? So, they are handsome. मैंने अभी तार मंगवाया था कंप्यूटर का. It's Westland. They've been doing my best. Amazon Westland.
It says connecting to audio. Let me just ask them.
लखनऊ लिटफेस्ट का खेला इस बार लखनऊ यूनिवर्सिटी के साथ.
And she just said their electricity
ये लखनऊ
doesn't go.
यूनिवर्सिटी
I was just thinking that.
इसने पिछले 100 साल से अज्ञानता के खिलाफ जंग छेड़ रखी है. वैसे जंग से याद आया.
Okay, they're saying that they are back. Are we online?
It's still self-connecting too.
Says we'll give you a heads up.
आप आइए लखनऊ लिटफेस्ट में, वहीं मुलाकात होती है.
We are on.
लखनऊ लिटफेस्ट का खेला.
Great, thank you. Sorry for that interruption. There is another potential interruption that might occur. Pavanji is unfortunately, his battery is on the blink. So in case we do get cut off mid-conversation, please excuse us and please do buy the book, because this conversation is just a sort of entry point for you to whet your appetite, in a sense, before you read this book. So please do go ahead and buy it. But
And I'd like to answer one question. One point I would like to, why this book? After all, the Manas is available for its readers. But I find that a lot of people who otherwise know parts of the Manas, Tulsidas' Manas, or a lot of people will not go through an epic from page 1 to page end, because it's a large read. And therefore they don't read at all. And my idea is to introduce the Manas to an audience that would like to know, perhaps may not have the time to read the entire epic. So from my subjective point of view, I have selected those stanzas which appeal to me the most, put them together with a translation and commentary, so that the Ramcharitmanas becomes more accessible to readers, with the translation in English and Hindi.
and just one more point to it, also the selections that are made here also
Ask Yashwant any questions?
touch upon all the different aspects, or at least most of the vital aspects of what Ramcharitmanas has to offer. Sorry, was there, Kanakji, were you saying something?
Questions?
I don't know. I haven't been sent any audience questions, but in the interest of time, Pavanji, just to conclude, you were speaking when we got cut off, you were talking about the concept of dharma as manifested in this book. And I will just tack on one more thing that is a sort of extension of that, which is the idea of Ram Rajya. So we talk about Ram in exile, Ram in battle, and then Ram's reign, which has become such a sort of, it's captured India's imagination, even political imagination to some extent. So if you could just talk about these two concepts as they occur in Ramcharitmanas to conclude.
The Ram Rajya notion. See, the Ram Rajya, I don't see it as a Hindu notion. And I agree with Mahatma Gandhi's interpretation of Ram Rajya as a kind of desirable utopia for which mankind and societies must aspire. What does Tulsidas say? Dehik devik bhautik tapa Ram Raj nahi kahu hi vyapa Sab nar karahi paraspar preeti. So everyone is respectful of the other. There are no ills, no woes. It's a harmonious society. It is a concept that Tulsidas presents to us of the ideal society. I think that's an inspiration for all societies of any ism to aspire to. And Mahatma Gandhi certainly interpreted it in that manner and clarified then his interpretation for those who thought that perhaps he's trying to privilege Hinduism over anything else. He said it's a secular concept for him of a desirable society.
And of course, you write about there are verses on Ram Rajya in the book as well. So I feel like, given all the different interruptions, we have still managed to give people a good introduction, and for the rest of it, the book will do the talking. Thank you, Pavanji, for speaking with me, and thank you, Kanakji. Thank you, Metaphor Literature Festival, for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pragya. Thank you once again, Kanakji. Great pleasure. Bye bye.